let's see how this works. Oh, excellent. All right, so you can see a little map there, I hope. And we're going to talk about the aftermath of the War of 1812 in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which for those, well, let me ask, of the gentlemen who are here right now, were any of you not here last time? No? Good. All right, so I'll just carry on where we left off. So we left off at the War of 1812, and the town had been devastated by the effects of the British invasion and the embargo and all that rigmarole going on with the Brits. So the English are gone, and now comes some glory years for the town. And if you look, see this little, you can see my cursor. We got 2 points right over here. Can you see this little harbor over here? This is not to scale, but this is actually quite far meaning probably about 5 miles away from town. It's not to scale. But this is where another town in Provincetown sprouted up. And this is called, it had a name, and it was called Helltown. Helltown because the people who went over there had wanted nothing to do with authority or religion or churches, whatever. So whenever the preachers would go there to try to preach to the pirates and whoever was living out there, it never ended well. So that nobody wanted anything to do with the Helltown people. But they had a nice little community going on of about 50 families. And there were, let's see, I'm going to read from here. Whaling ships, grand bankers, mackerel fishers ranged the seas. And not only did they range the seas from here, I mean, they went around the entire world, all the way to the South Pacific, to Africa, everywhere in the world. This was a major fishing port in the making coming up. Over here, I'll have another picture coming up, but there's another point that's probably out of the view here called Long Point. And now they're building houses out, and these wharves you can see are showing up. So right around here, see this monument here? That is a current monument, the Pilgrim Monument, but there used to be a town hall that was built there. The town hall was built on this hill, which is called High Pole Hill. And I'm gonna jump ahead. There were 44 wharves, and the fine homes began to appear where the cottages, poor cottages had once stood. So now we have a lot of wealth and money coming into Provincetown. And by 1850, Provincetown enjoyed the highest per capita income of any town in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and third in the United States of America. But we're going to go to what's going on here in town. The fishing and whaling industry takes off, and the Freemasons are right in the front. So we have all these ship owners, ship builders, the people who outfitted the sails, the people who supplied this, the food and everything and provisions for these ships were all members of King Hiram's Lodge. So it was a really good time for the lodge. This is one story I'm going to choose for you, which I love. See this house here? This house, I took this photo maybe about 6 years ago. And if you read, it says, "A home at last." It's very common around these parts. See this wooden name here that we usually have gold. It'd be painted in black paint with gold letters. And this would go on the side, the bow side of your vessel. And then you would affix it to your house. So a lot of houses have such a thing. This one says, "A home at last." And the story that was written in 1820, it says, from the records of King Hiram's Lodge, it says, "During one of the most severe winters, the harbor was in a deep freeze. Several trading ships were tied up to Union Wharf," and that's right here behind where this house is at 99 Commercial Street. "Frozen in, they were unable to leave port. And one of the seamen, Dick Kelly, brother Dick Kelly entered his name in masonry. After his acceptance, he was given his 3 degrees within 45 days because if the ice cleared, he would have to leave with his ship. He sent several years' dues to a merchant in town and asked him to pay them for him. Meanwhile, He visited many lodges throughout the world, as far as Hong Kong, Madagascar, South Africa, and the Azores. Many years later, he returned to Provincetown to retire. He had been born aboard a ship, had lived aboard a ship all of his entire life, and when he retired here, he purchased a small house at 99 Commercial Street. On the front of his house, he put up a sign that says, "A home at last." After his retirement, until the time of his death, he was in perfect attendance as Tyler of King Hiram's Lodge. And that's the heartwarming story that I love. Now we're going to go to the Morgan Affair. And I understand you guys talked about the Morgan Affair recently. You did. All right. Well, the Morgan Affair affected King Hiram's Lodge very directly. This is a photo I found on the internet, but the Morgan Affair, prior to the years of the Morgan Affair from 1826 to 1845, they were the glory years of Freemasonry in New England and the rest of the eastern coast of the United States, with the fraternity attracting men of influence from every community. But the fortunes of the fraternity fell after 100 years of steady growth. William Morgan was born in Culpeper, Virginia in 1774, a town I've been to a couple of times. And he claimed to have been a Mason, been made a Mason in Canada, where he had lived to work at a brewery, which was destroyed by a mysterious fire. And he was reduced to poverty with his wife. He claimed to have served as a captain in the War of 1812. That's not necessarily false, but there's no record that he was a captain. He gained admittance at Wells Lodge number 282 at Batavia in New York State. That's upstate New York. And he was described as being an unprincipled individual prone to the overzealous consumption of liquor. And then following the rejection of his request to form a Royal Arch chapter there and his subsequent rejection from the chapter he eventually formed, he was denied participation by members who disapproved of his character and even questioned his claims of Masonic membership. So this angered Morgan, and he entered into a scheme with David C. Miller, who was the editor-in-chief of the weekly newspaper in Batavia, New York, called the Republican Advocate. This was in 1826. And Miller published that soon there would be an exposition of the ancient craft rituals of Freemasonry. So if he had just let it go and published it, it probably would have died quietly, and it had been done before, but you guys know what happened. But he was killed or disappeared anyway. Nobody knows exactly what happened to him, but one sensational story that I found in our records here in Provincetown was that it says that there was a convention held in Lewiston, New York in 1887. Excuse me, 1887 I wrote. I don't think that's right. But in which the Masons were accused of gagging and binding an unhappy Morgan at Fort Niagara, murdering him in cold blood, slitting his throat from ear to ear, cutting out his tongue at the root, burying him in the sand, and to conclude the hellish rites, sinking his body in the lake at Niagara. And as a result of these allegations, the anti-Masonic Party was born, enlisting among its leaders John Quincy Adams. And Freemasonry was more fiercely denounced than ever, and the community was in a whirlpool of passion. Politicians came forth demanding resolutions against voting for Masons for any office whatsoever. In Vermont, our neighboring state, not a single lodge continued its work. And on the 14th of October, 1830, here in Massachusetts, the Grand Lodge building had been burned in another mysterious fire. If any of you have seen the Grand Lodge building in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's one of the most magnificent that I've ever seen in my life. Well, the Boston Grand Lodge was supposed to have rivaled that building, and it went up in flames. Nobody knows how. But anyway, they were laying the cornerstone in a Masonic ceremony on that day, and a big mob of screaming protesters showed up, screaming murderers and assassins. 101 lodges were registered in Massachusetts in 1826. And at the Grand Lodge Quarterly in 1832, there were only 34 lodges represented at the Grand Lodge Quarterly. So in King Hiram's Lodge here, we like to say that we've never missed a meeting. And this here, I've been looking at our handwritten records, and I think it might be true, but not exactly in the way that we believe, because it says up until 1832, we have very detailed records in our handwritten logs here. But then there's a big gap. It says the next recorded meeting was in 1834. There were 5 meetings between January 5th, February 10th, and then February again of 1835, and then a gap up until 1840. But we did find in the back of another book a little scribbling that said that they had met at 54 Commercial Street, which was the home of one of our worshipful masters. So apparently they were meeting in these houses during these years. So that's why we can claim to not have missed any meetings. I showed you a picture of our charter last time. And if you look carefully here, you can see, this is our charter. You can see how it's been damaged, and you got these cross lines here. This is because our worshipful master, Right Worshipful Waterman Crocker, who was a ship's carpenter, he was master of the lodge during these years. And he is said to have carried the charter around in his breast pocket during these years. So then Right Worshipful Joseph Johnson became master in 1851. And this is around the time when the Morgan affair craziness was about to settle down. And we started meeting in the nearby Oddfellows Hall. Oddfellows, I'm sure you have them over there in Washington as well, but the Marine Lodge of Oddfellows was founded here in Provincetown, and almost all of the charter members were Masons, were members of King Hiram's Lodge. So I'm going to read this really nice obituary that I love here. This was from one of our charter members who founded, together with the other brothers in 1795, King Hiram's Lodge, published in the Provincetown Banner newspaper. And he had become the secretary, and later he was the tiler for many years. What was his name here? I just skipped by it. Oh, Waterman Crocker was his name. So at his funeral, this was the obituary. He has stood by her, the lodge, through evil and good report. And in the troublesome times of the anti-Masonic excitement, which swept over our land like a moral pestilence, which confounded the innocent with the guilty, which distracted and divided churches, which sundered the nearest ties of social life, which set father against son and son against father, arrayed the wife against her own husband, and in short, wherever its baleful influences were most felt, deprived men of all those comforts and enjoyments which rendered life to us a blessing. When many around him were bending to the blast of the whirlwinds of fanatical fury, which was passing over them, he stood like the sturdy oak, unmoved and unwavering amid the storm. He has lived through the darkness of the night to see the sun of Masonry again arise in all its original splendor, while others who sacrificed their principles and their honor before the Morlock of an unrighteous and misguided public sentiment lived to receive the scorn of Masons and of all honorable men. He has now gone to his rest, a faithful Mason who we shall do well to imitate. I thought that was very beautiful words about this guy coming out the other side, doing the right thing. Here's a picture of the same charter. This is from the book, so I photocopied this from the books. That's why you have that grid there, but you can see Paul Revere, Grand Master, 1795. So next picture here. Oh, this is the next one here. This was one of the casualties of the Morgan affair. So here at the very tip of Cape Cod, we have two Masonic lodges. Both of them are Paul Revere lodges. We are 1795 King Hyams Lodge. And in Wellfleet, which is about 20 miles away from where I'm sitting now, is Adams Lodge. Adams Lodge was one of those lodges founded by Paul Revere that had to go dark. And the good thing is later in the years, we're going to get to that later, I think it was after the Civil War, they were not only did they get their charter back and reconstitute, but they were very lucky to get their original building back too. So here is Adams Lodge as it appeared at Halloween a couple of years ago. Every year at Halloween, we decorate it up to look like the Adams family house. And all the children come and have a big Halloween and see all that stuff, the graveyard and all that. At the last meeting we have at the end of September, we all do a human chain and pass all this graveyard and pumpkin stuff from the basement up and put it all in the yard. So I was senior warden there for a couple of years. All right, so we talked about the Oddfellows house. I don't have a picture of that. I wish I did. It's actually a beautiful building that's very, only a couple of blocks from where I'm sitting. But that was the meeting place after all the Morgan affair, when the lodge was forced to sell the building in 1852. So the original building, which I showed you before, which was built in 1797, and still stands today. It's a guest house. That building became the first Roman Catholic church. So I'm reading here, the conclusion of the hysteria caused by the Morgan affair, there was an increased interest in fraternal organizations and secret societies. Besides the Oddfellows, there were also, and here's a cool list here, the Independent Order of Oddfellows, the United Ancient Order of Druids, founded in 1781, which became, it's from London, but it actually had a foothold in Eastham, which is here in Cape Cod. The Ancient Order of Foresters, the Society of Red Men, founded in 1813, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, I don't know if you heard about these, the Nativist Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, here's the one to know, often referred to as the Know-Nothings, originated in 1849 as an oath-bound secret society, but later became a political party enjoying some brief success and some regional and even national prominence, whose members were instructed to claim that they knew nothing of any secret society. All right. This is a chapter here. See this book. This is one of our books. And I'm going to get to this. I have a photo coming later, but there was a book, and I'm going to show you. Can you see on my picture here, this book here that I showed you last time is called Every First Mondays, The History of King Hyams Lodge. It was written by one of our masters, James Theriault. Well, James Theriault did this together with Reggie Cabral, who's quite a towering figure in recent history in Provincetown. He died probably about 15 years ago and had a magnificent house that was inherited by one of my friends. Well, I just learned he was, let's just call things what they are. He was a hoarder, all right. And while he was writing these books with these other guys, they they took the books, you know, to his house, the magnificent house that I'm going to show you a photo later. And then when he died, there was a fight among the sisters. They had 3 sisters, 3 daughters. And then just before one of them inherited the house, the other one who got kicked out of the house had all the art, fabulous art, furnishings, everything removed. And I just learned last week that possibly the missing books from King Hiram's Lodge from the whaling period are in this other woman's house here in Provincetown, interestingly, right next door to King Hiram's Lodge. So my friend told me that they're still buddies. I think I can get these books back that have been missing. But this is, it's actually a video, but look at this book. This is the only one of the whaling years that we have surviving. Oh, look at this handwriting. But we have everything is written down in this book, and I'm going to read you a couple of the stories here. So, oh, here's the house. So this is at 160 Commercial Street, and I've actually been lots of Halloween parties in this house. But the story I want to read is, see, I got all these little things. Oh, the story of the Ardent. There's lots and lots of stories here. There's too many for me to recount, and each one is, I mean, each story is better than the previous one. They just get better and better. But I'm going to read a couple of stories, and one of them was the whaling brig Ardent, which was, it had 4 members of King Hiram's Lodge. It was owned by a master of King Hiram's Lodge. And September 28th of 1823, while in a whaling expedition off of the Azores in the Western Islands, the crew was composed of Samuel Soper, who has a street named after him in town, Hicks and Smalley, who we have other streets here, and John Savage, all members of the lodge. The hurricane hove the vessel down and washed off Caskin into the drink. Gross and Nickerson followed. The masts were carried away to the decks while the vessel righted itself, but being full of water, only a small portion on the afterdeck stayed above, which is where the rest of the crew took refuge for 26 days. One after another of the crew died from exposure beneath the waves, trapped in the capsized ship. They died of thirst and starvation, the only water being obtained from an occasional rain squall being saved in their clothing, and then they wrung it out. At first, they subsided off of barnacles and small fish. Actually, it said fishlets written down. But as the men became enfeebled and died, their bodies furnished the rest with their only food until there were only 5 remaining. The captain, the mate, Hudson Rich, and Cyrenius Smalley. The British packet ship, the Lord Sundermouth, bound for Falmouth, England, sighted the wreck and took on the survivors. Hicks Smalley died shortly after being taken on board, and his body was preserved in a barrel of whale oil before being transported to Provincetown, where he is buried today. Hudson and Cyrenius Smalley died shortly after returning to Provincetown, but Samuel Soper, who survived, refused to speak about the suffering and deprivation that had occurred and continued to own and command several whaling vessels. Philip Rich died at Provincetown at an advanced age and had rarely alluded to the disaster, but did relate these details to his granddaughter, whose middle name was Sudmouth, given for the ship that had rescued them. Philip Rich's Master Mason certificate is in the lodge's collection today. And there's so many stories of these crazy, crazy voyages that happened during these years. So let's talk about the Civil War, which and here we call it the Civil War today, but in our books it's called the Rebellion. So the rebellion took place in 1861. So war, it says, war always brought ruin to Provincetown, and the Civil War was no different. Provincetown entered the war early when its harbor again figured prominently in yet another historical incident, the conclusion of what would become the Trent Affair. The Trent Affair, I'm not going to get into it, but you can look that up. The Trent Affair was an exchange of spies that happened in Provincetown Harbor. The British came over, and one of them was from the Confederate Army, and one was from the North, and the British intervened. Provincetown provided the Union with 300 men during the Civil War, 57 more than her quota, and the men of King Hiram's Lodge were largely represented in that number. Here's a good part here. The number of applications to receive the degrees at King Hiram's Lodge soared during the war. So men leaving for the war, captains in command of departing vessels, received their degrees at special communications. Some members received 2 and even all 3 degrees on the same evening under dispensation, because Freemasonry in the southern states was spared much of the anti-Masonic sentiment caused by the Morgan Affair. In fact, it was a very strong influence in Southern political life. Through the Civil War, it was precipitated by the belief that membership would provide some sort of protection in the event of capture. The Grand Master of the Knights Templar of North Carolina, it issued an edict imploring each one to exert all means at their command to avert the dread calamity and prevent the shedding of fraternal blood. So King Hiram's Lodge member, Brother Albert G. Mackey, wrote that he never approached a Mason or a lodge in Charleston, South Carolina, with a petition for the relief of a destitute, suffering a prison of war without receiving the kindest response and the most liberal donation. If there was war without, there was always peace within our lodges. Captain Stephen Nickerson, whose great-grandson is a friend of mine and a member of King Hiram's Lodge, was one of the wealthiest men in town and a member of King Hiram's Lodge. When vessel property was good property, he owned a 188-ton bark Spartan, engaged another member of the lodge, Brother Josiah Cook, who became worshipful master, as captain. And his home, same house I mentioned before, 54 Commercial Street at the 1807 house. During the Civil War, his home was one of about 4, at least 4 houses in Provincetown functioning as part of the Underground Railroad system, with Southern slaves escaping north to Canada, finding food, shelter, and relief at these stations during the day. After nightfall, they were spirited aboard fishing schooners and shipped to Nova Scotia. So we have a lot of connections with the lodges in Nova Scotia, a big history between us for this rescuing of slaves at King Hiram's Lodge. Brother Cashaman, another brother here, he received a gunshot wound at the Battle of Winchester, Virginia. He survived only to be shot through the chest at Appomattox. But he survived, returned to Provincetown, where he became the lighthouse keeper of Race Point Lighthouse for 15 years. And Brother John Rosenthal has a history that, although very interesting, makes a very different study. I'm going to read this one to you. This is something I found. Check this one out. You know about the new times we live in, the enlightened times that we live in, where, you know, like what happened in the past, you know, we have to look through the lens of those years and not today. This is a true story here. John Rosenthal was actually French. He was born in Alsace-Lorraine under French government, although he was a German speaker, okay? He enlisted in the United States Army in Provincetown in 1854. He was assigned to the 5th Regiment Infantry. He was sent to Texas, where he was engaged against the Comanche and Lepro Indians. In 1857 to Florida under General Harney against the Seminole Indians and Chief Billy Bowlegs. In the fall of 1857, he was transferred to Utah to fight against Brigham Young and the Mormons. In 1859, Rosenthal served under the General Canby in New Mexico against the Navajo Indians. In 1864, he was placed in charge of the batteries built at Long Point. That's the harbor right here behind me. In Provincetown Harbor, he was stationed for 12 years at Fort Ridiculous. I'm going to get to that. That's the name. Fort Ridiculous is a real place. Where he was stationed for 12 years. There was Fort Ridiculous, Fort Defenseless, and Fort Useless. Three forts that were built out on Long Point. They were called that because Civil War never came here, ever, right? But they built these just in case. So they spent a lot of money, and the town people, when the war never came, they lamented about the money that has spent and called them ridiculous, useless, and defenseless. Today, there are mounds out there. Nothing remains, nothing at all, but mounds. One of them has a cross on top, and I'll show you a picture of that later. All right, so 1876 through 1885, he was stationed in New Mexico, North Dakota, and at Fort Preble in Maine. He retired to Provincetown in 1885, becoming Secretary of Nickerson Oil Works at Herring Cove, and that's where Helltown was that I showed you. He served as Tyler of King Hiram's Lodge for 16 years and presented the lodge with a sterling square and compass in 1875 that today resides on top of the King James Bible on our altar in our lodge room today. I didn't know this story of this guy. A noted photographer, Irving Rosenthal's photographs at the turn of the century Provincetown scenes, residents, and shipwrecks can now be included in a number of historical and referenced books about Cape Cod. I found out that his daughter was Irma Ruckstuhl, who made this book. And this book is full of magnificent photography. And this was the daughter of this guy who basically was out killing Indians. What a story. This is a view from my window right behind me, behind the window behind me. And if you look, there's the lighthouse that remains. There used to be a whole community, a whole town was here. And right here, this little bump, that's Fort Ridiculous that I can see from my window. This is Long Point from the air. And basically, if you look here, there's the lighthouse. So my house is probably right here. That's where I am. All right, next on the list, I'm going to tell you about the, I scrolled too far. Rebellion, King Hiram's Lodge, Rosenthal. Oh, the sea serpent. You want to know about the sea serpent, don't you? Oh, here's our lodge building. I'm getting ahead. This building wasn't built until 1870. So that's after the war. So that's next time. There is a view here. This is our lodge building today, still standing. And the lodge room is right here, and right in the middle, the master's chair is right where the cursor is. This is the Unitarian Church. This is the old town hall that burned down. And when it burned down, everyone thought that they had lost the entire history of Provincetown. But as I'm telling you now, all the history that I'm telling you was in this building in our lodge. So. This brother was Brother Dr. George Reedy, already. And no, that's not his name. Reedy, George Washington Reedy. So George Washington Reedy, member of King Hiram's Lodge, was the town crier in 1888. And he was a very flamboyant character. This is the same guy, photographed by the guy who killed the Indians. Alrighty. So this is one of my favorite stories. He was known for telling tall tales, but he read one tale of his made it into national news. In 1886, Professor Reedy alleges that he saw a monster. And he wrote this: the sea serpent in Provincetown. The recent earthquakes have so disturbed the bottom of the ocean that many of the huge creatures, which it is believed exist there, have come to the surface, which it is believed exist. Sea serpents and other nondescript monsters, it is alleged, have been seen in various places besides Marblehead, the sea serpent's home. Marblehead is near Boston. The latest and the most colossal in dimensions was visited in Provincetown. Brother George W. Reedy, a well-known citizen, was going from the town to the backside of the Cape, and in crossing one of the sand dunes or hills, he saw a commotion out in the water about half a mile from the shore at Herring Cove. It looked like a whirlpool, and from his standpoint, appeared to be about 20 feet in diameter, from the center of which jets of spray, looking like steam, were ejected to the height of 50 feet. Intently watching this strange phenomenon, he presently saw a huge head appear above the surface and point for the shore. The head was as large as 200-gallon cask, concave on the underside and convex on the upper. Mr. Reedy saw the creature coming towards him and secreted himself in a clump of beach plum bushes, where he got a good view of the monster. The creature swam to the shore with a slow and undulating motion and passed within about 30 feet of where Mr. Reedy was secreted. It was about 300 feet long, and in the thickest part, which was about the middle, he judged as it passed him to be about 12 feet in diameter. The body was covered with scales as large as the head of a fish barrel and were colored alternatively green, red, and blue. They did not overlap each other, but seemed as if they were joined together by a ligature some 4 inches broad. The most curious feature was the head. The open mouth disclosed 4 rows of teeth which glistened like polished ivory and were at least 2 feet long, while on the extreme end of the head or nose extended a tusk or a horn at least 8 feet in length. The creature had 6 eyes as large as good-sized dinner plates, and they were placed at the end of movable projections, so they were at least 3 feet from the head. In the creatures moving along, these projections were continually on the move so that the reptile could see before, behind, and sideways all at the same time. 3 of the eyes were a fiery red hue, while the others were of a pale green. A strong sulfurous odor accompanied him. An intense heat was emitted so much that the bushes and grass over which he slithered have the appearance of being scorched by fire. And when the tail came out of the water, it was seen to be of a V shape of the broadest part toward the body, to which it was joined by a small bony cartilage of about 20 feet long and only 10 inches in diameter. This tail on the broad part was studded with very hard bony scales shaped like the teeth of a mowing machine or a reaper, about 1 foot long each and 8 inches at the base, and cut everything smooth to the ground as it was dragged over the surface. Pine and scrub oak trees nearly 1 foot in diameter were cut off as smoothly as if done by a saw, and have the appearance of being seared over with a hot iron. The creature made one of the large freshwater ponds called Pasture Pond, that's the real place here, when in the center of the head, which had all the time been raised some 30 feet in the air, began to slowly descend and was soon under the water, and the body slowly following it. As the tail disappeared, the water commenced to recede from the shore until the pond was left completely dry, with a large hole in the center some 20 feet in diameter, perfectly circular, down which sounding leads have been lowered 250 fathoms and no bottom found yet. By standing on the brink of the hole, what appears to be water can be seen at a very long distance down. Preparations are now being made to investigate the matter, and thousands are going to see and examine the track of the huge sea monster. For fear that this statement should be doubted, for anyone try to contradict it, I have appended a copy of Mr. Reedy's affidavit and signature. Follows, I, George Washington Reedy, do testify that the foregoing statement is correct and true, and an accurate description of the serpent as he appeared to me on that morning. And I was not unduly excited by liquor or otherwise. George W. Reedy. There you have it. It must be true. Next is for the following time, because we're going to run out of time, but one of the really interesting stories is the life-saving stations. The life-saving station was founded just after the Civil War because the backside of Cape Cod is known as the graveyard of Atlantic. If you look at a map, if you go all the way from Chatham to Provincetown, you have about, I'm going to guess, about 50 miles of rough sea that collides with a very steep cliff into sand dunes and then to the beach. So if you're in a ship and you hit a storm, there's literally nowhere to go. So these brothers made the Cape Cod National Seashore, which is today you can go and see these dunes and you can actually take a tour of them, these buildings. And here's our lodge today. This was last year, and this is me, the really short bald guy right there. So somebody asked me why my head's always lower than other people, and I said, that's because I'm short. Anyway, and that's me. Bada bing. This is our lodge in a snowstorm, very bad quality photo. I have the original somewhere, but we are done with tonight's presentation for right now. I would like to go into the what do you call it? The Civil War a little bit more. And when I can locate these missing books, which I told you I think I might have found, I would like to tell you more stories about the adventures or misadventures of the Brothers of King Hiram's Lodge.
As always, Daniel, thank you so much for that. I mean, you have a unique perspective because you live in a place that basically, for all intents and purposes, kind of where Freemasonry started. Granted, I know there was other lodges before yours, but you know, as for those who missed the first presentation that Daniel did for us, remember his officers' jewels were made by Paul Revere, and his lodge's charter was signed by then Grand Master Paul Revere. So you don't get too much. There's not too much before that. I have a question, and then Nick Franz has a question.
Sure. Your
house has got to be in the most incredible location. How did you get so lucky to get that piece of property?
You know, it's when you come to Provincetown, first of all, it's just like, it is so ridiculously expensive to live here. It's just outrageous to live here. But people come anyway, and you know, you rent, you just find a place, and they always say good things come to those who wait. And eventually I stumbled upon this place, and it was a woman who was selling it, and she had she's a lesbian, and she had a very bad relationship with her previous partner, and then she got a new girlfriend, and she didn't want to continue her new relationship in a building that had bad memories, although she also had happy memories. So she wanted to keep the good karma going, and then it was on the market for quite a long while, but she just wouldn't sell it. And then it was kind of the bottom of the market. We're talking 11 years ago, and here we landed, and here we are, you know. And I hope you come visit one day. It's pretty nice, and the view, well, I showed you a picture, so it's dark now, but it's pretty nice, and you can walk anywhere. I can walk to my lodge in less than 10 minutes at a leisurely pace, but the town is tiny. You can see from those pictures I showed you, it's a little town. There's only we say it's 2 streets wide and 3 miles long, and that's it.
Sounds like a road trip. I'm looking forward to that. Nick Franz. You had a question, and I
Yes,
wanted to
I
get your
did.
question.
Daniel, in the you were looking at the, I think they were the secretary's minutes, the books
Yeah.
that you had, and you had several drawings that included whales.
Yes.
What were the significance of those whales? And it looked like one meeting had one whale, and then you scroll down, and there was another meeting with 3 whales. And I think you said something about that the last meeting, but maybe I missed out on what that meant.
Yeah. So that goes back to the missing books that I told you about. So what happened is, if you excuse me, not King Hiram's Lodge, Provincetown is mentioned in Moby Dick. So back in the whaling years, you had, on the East Coast anyway, you have New Bedford, which is where Moby Dick begins. You have Nantucket, which was a big whaling port, and then you have Provincetown. Those are the 3 big whaling places. And then there's lots of others too in the world, including Lahaina and Maui is a huge one as well. But here was these. So during those years, many of the brothers of King Hiram's Lodge were the captains and owners of such whaling ships. So there's lots of written records of all these expeditions, and they're really mentioned in this book here. Can you see it? It's called Wooden Ships and Iron Men. And this is actually published by King Hiram's Lodge. And it just mentions all the books, all of the ships that were owned by members of King Hiram's Lodge, including this one here. That's the picture I scanned and showed you earlier. So ironically, that's where these missing books ended up and got spirited away, but I found them. But to answer your question, I don't know exactly the story about that particular adventure, but it would be kind of similar to the story I told you about the guy who got killed by a whale, and the whale that capsized the boat. And then they put his body in a barrel of whale oil. That was, I guess, a thing back then to preserve you. And they're all in here. Here's this other book here. Look at all of these books I have here. But you got Provincetown Tideways. Let me tell you, when I was making this presentation, I just got overwhelmed because I found this book, and I found this book, and I found this book, Sail Away Ladies, which is outrageous. It's funny. It's actually funny, but sad how this brother of King Hiram's Lodge took his poor wife and daughter to the Arctic for what was going to be 3 years and turned out to be 16, and she went absolutely crazy. And who would blame her, the poor lady? And she went bonkers. And when they got back to Provincetown, he was kicked out. He was expelled from the fraternity for having treated his wife so poorly. And then there's one here I showed you. This is the one who's, this woman's father, Irma Ruckstuhl, was the one who basically had a career shooting Native Americans. And then this one here is the book that I really go to every first Monday, which is the book about King Hiram's Lodge history itself. This one here is called Provincetown, Odds and End from the Tip End. This book is from this book was made, the centennial edition, but it was made, it's an exact copy of the original book from, 1885. Yeah. And then this one here, which is the Civil War, how the Civil War affected Freemasonry. So you can see one could just get really down a rabbit hole with all these books. And there's so many books written about things that have everything exactly to do with my lodge and members. The brothers of King Hiram's Lodge had their fingers in every pie in this town's history.
So there's a takeaway that I have from this, and that is a precedence has been set, and that is if you take your wife to the Arctic, don't stay there too long.
Yeah, well, these journeys went for they didn't go away for 2 weeks. They went away for years and years.
Yeah, that seems to be now, Brendan. I should point out to you that it appears that and very worshipful sir, I see the deputy to the Grand Master 13 is here. From what I can hear, it appears that Daniel's left open the possibility of part 3 to his presentation series. You very worshipful. Since I'm turning this over to you in November, I'm sure that you and Daniel will want to chat. By the way, I should point out, Daniel's parents live Seattle?
Renton.
They live in Renton. And so he finds himself over in the Pacific Northwest, every so now and then. And when he finds himself in the Northwest, he sends a message to me wondering if anyone's meeting. So if I see that you're meeting, I'm going to let you know that Daniel's in town, and we might show up. So just be aware of that and no, he does not travel with the Paul Revere Jewels. I need to point that out. He doesn't travel with the Paul Revere Jewels at all.
No, we don't.
Very worshipful, you have your hand up.
I did. I'd like to let Daniel know that I have seen a charter that was written by Paul Revere at the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, or was it Massachusetts? I don't remember which one, but I've seen a charter written by Brother Revere. It was really kind of neat. Now, I live in Renton also, and I'd like to talk with you about visiting when you come to town. And maybe I can talk with you about visiting when I come to your town.
That would be great. Yeah, I actually make it at least twice a year. I was supposed to be there this year, but because of COVID, I couldn't go. And by the way, my parents, you're in Renton, so my parents live in Merrill Gardens, by the way, in Renton.
I do know where that is. I have been there a couple of times. Really kind of neat.
Yeah. So they live, they're happy there, but they're not allowed to visit or anything. So I can't visit them. My sister, I have two sisters there as well. My one sister lives in Newcastle, and the other one lives in Covington. And I have nieces and nephews who live in Kirkland. So I have plenty of reasons to go there. Yeah, plenty of reason to go there. Yes, I go there a lot. And I've traveled with Most Worshipful a couple of times. We went to Frank S. Land. And where else did we go together? We went to the one I can't pronounce.
Silicum.
Yeah, see that one.
Silicum, and had a lovely dinner at a little bistro.
Oh, that was really fun. Yeah, like a mussels or something. It was good.
It was fantastic. Yeah. Well, I was concerned about serving you mussels, because, but then again, our seafood here and your seafood there, there's different opinions, that's for sure.
Oh,
speaking about seafood, Dan Moss, how you doing? Go ahead. Let me get you unmuted. You gotta unmute yourself, buddy. There you are.
I love to hear the tales he talks about there. Daniel was talking about, and I hear all the kind of tales of my parents were born in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, so I heard a lot of the old time tales about that.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of we here in Provincetown. If you look at a map, we're literally, we're almost an island. We're at the very, very, very tip of a long peninsula, tip of Cape Cod. But because of our histories, we're very well connected with, especially Halifax and Yarmouth of Nova Scotia and Nantucket. There's so much communication over the centuries. So yeah, our stories are very closely meshed together.
I see Steve Daisies here. Good to see you.
Thank you. I was a few minutes late, but definitely have enjoyed logging in when I'm able to listen to the presentations. And Daniel was extremely interesting this evening. So thank you very much.
Tom Bond, good to see you too.
So I have a question for you guys. What did you think about that crazy sea serpent story?
Dan, you're the fisherman.
Well, I can't say that I was up that close to one, but when you're out in the wilderness, whether you're hunting or on the water, which I've been lots in both places, things happen out there that when you look back, you say, I know I just saw something, but it's not there right now. So you can't go say to your buddy, hey, there's a monster out there. So I can't say that I've seen one.
Hey, Nick, what's going on?
I wonder if that
fishing.
person was eating the same stuff as the person who saw the white rabbit.
Yes.
The only monster that I've seen on the water was up south of Kodiak, up in what's A3 is the fishing area. The skipper of the boat I was crewing on was the monster. That's as close as I can come on the sea.
Well, I can say that I work for Fish and Wildlife, and we've yet to included a sea monster in any of the literature that we put out. But I can also say, though, you know, you say you see things. When Mount St. Helens blew, my little brother and I were down on the river, and he swears, I mean, to his dying day, he swore up and down that he saw Bigfoot come out of the woods, cross the road to get away from the flooding on the Toutle River. So, you know, when things are getting stressful, there are some stuff that you swear up and down that you've seen.